I'm speaking on behalf of the National Committee to Free the Cuban Five and the more than 350 organizations, committees that have been established around the world and in the United States to demand the freedom of 5 Cuban nationals who are in prison in the United States, serving 15 years to double life sentences for having peacefully monitored the actions of the terrorists whom we have mentioned, and many more, in Miami. We demand more vigorously than ever the immediate freedom of the Cuban Five, who are scattered in U.S. prisons and facing very, very dangerous situations while in prison. The hypocrisy of the Bush administration stands out in great contrast here with what Bush has done in harboring, nurturing, supporting, financing the terrorists who are running free in Miami, while the Cuban Five have met every type of persecution possible by the same administration. I was in Atlanta in August 20th of last year when we heard the oral arguments for the Cuban Five, and we're waiting the decision any day. But even before that decision comes from the 3-judge panel, we are demanding that the Bush administration respect the decision of the UN working group, the United Nations working group on arbitrary detention, which found numerous violations of due process in the United States in relation to this case. I was also at the oral arguments for the Cuban Five. In February 14th, 1996, in Atlanta, when the U.S. Attorney, Alejandro Acosta, Cuban-American in Miami, U.S. prosecutor, argued vigorously for the imprisonment of the Cuban Five and to try to overturn the victory they had won. They had won a new retrial. He argued against the Cuban Five, and shortly thereafter, he argued for a reduction in sentence of Santiago Alvarez, the terrorist who was revealed yesterday by Cuba, having sent on a regular basis $1,500 to one of the so-called dissidents in Cuba, Marta Beatriz Roque. So Santiago Alvarez, a known terrorist, is being released early on a very meager 4-year sentence for having massive caches of weapons, thanks to the U.S. Attorney who is fighting to keep the Cuban Five in prison. That is an absolute double standard. And along with the A.N.S.W.E.R coalition and our fellow speakers here today who represent organizations and many, many other people, we are going to keep linking the two. The demand for freedom for men who are fighting terrorism, who would be considered heroes in any country, and the extradition, prosecution of all these known terrorists in Miami. I'd like to say one thing, another act of Santiago Alvarez and who this man is. As Jose Bertierra said, he is the shadow of Luis Posada Gavides. And one other thing he did was, he walked into the Miami Police Supply Store in March 2001. He personally bought 8 AK-47 assault rifles, 2,000 rounds of ammunition, and pistols. And these weapons were later intercepted by the Cuban Border Patrol in the hands of 4 men who tried to infiltrate Cuba to carry out massive attacks on Cuba. And that is when one of them confessed to Cuba, and while he's being filmed by Cuban television in a hotel room, calls Santiago Alvarez to ask, what do I do with these cans of C4 explosives? And Alvarez tells him, throw them in the Tropicana nightclub and do away with all that, meaning hundreds of people. This is Santiago Alvarez. And then when the sisters of this young man, the second from the left, second row, Raymond Prasad, he was killed on that plane bombing. 19-year-old Guyanese youth who was flying to Cuba, boarded a plane for the first time in his life to study medicine in Cuba and never returned because he died on that plane. His sisters came to El Paso when the A.N.S.W.E.R coalition sponsored a protest in front of the courtroom where Posada was only facing immigration charges. That was August 29, 2005. And the sisters had requested Homeland Security the right to enter the courtroom to be witness for their brother and the other victims. And Homeland Security Barbara Gonzalez said, no, you cannot enter. And 2 minutes later, she allows Santiago Alvarez to walk into the courtroom. Enough said. So we are here again. We call on the Bush administration to free the Cuban 5 and extradite Luis Posada Carrillo.